Alright, welcome to SculptSpace. This is my YouTube channel that I'm starting, and I really just want to start this to get some of my content out there. I want to show people how to make molds, how to paint, how to cast, how to sculpt, sort of branch out and do different other things. But first, I want to start with something that I've been getting familiar with, which is creating molds and casts. And I hope you guys enjoy. Basically what I'm going to be doing is starting a series called How Do We Get There? So I'm going to take my original clay sculpture, make it into a mold, you can see it, and then cast it, paint it, and gloss it. And I'll show you the process on how to do all these different things, and I just hope you guys enjoy. In this first video, I'm going to show you guys how to take your sculptures and make them into a mold. This time I'm doing an octopus. During the demolding stage I had to rip all his legs off, and I shot this intro after that, so this is all that we have left of it. I do have a final product. This is after we cast and paint it. So this first video is actually just going to be molding, and I'll hopefully have another video out later that is going to be casting and painting, sanding, and all that. So look forward to that video coming out next. Alright, so the first step is figuring out how tall the tentacles are going to be so we can cut out the cardboard to that exact measurement. I figured out that the tentacles are all at least 2 inches tall all around. Alright, so now that I know how tall the tentacles are going to be, I can now find out the length. Okay, so now I've figured out the length of each. The first one is going to be 3 inches, the next is 7 inches, 2 inches, 3 inches, 2.5 inches, 3 inches once again, and then lastly is 5.5 inches. This next step is pretty simple. All I'm doing now is cutting along the lines. As you can see, a good extra tool to have is a box cutter. This part is simple. You just match them up like puzzle pieces. When gluing my berries together, I like to start with the biggest pieces first. This is just something I like to do, but it's not mandatory. And little by little, you build up them walls. You may notice that I'm also gluing the outside of the wall instead of the inside of the wall. That's so at the end, when I take all the cardboard off, I get a cleaner finish. She look good?
Oh yeah, she looks great. She's a natural.
And you repeat this process all 7 times. After you got all the bases down, you can start connecting all the walls together. This part can be tedious as you wait for the glue to dry. Then after all the walls, you put your sculpture in the middle and see if it fits. And luckily, ours fits. The next step is going to be putting clay softener all over the sculpture. I like to use Sculpey brand clay softener, but you could also just use baby oil. What this will help do is get rid of all those unwanted fingerprints that you have left over from your sculpt. And now you can see I'm just brushing it on gently. This step is not necessary, although it does help clean it up. And now, just a little pupper. Now that we have done all those prepping steps, we can now start to use silicone. To make this specific mold, I'm using Moldstar 15 Slow, which will take about 4 hours to fully cure. Now you want to make sure that you mix these up fairly well while they're still in their pails. Now I'm pouring part A and part B into separate cups that are slightly smaller, so it will be easier to pour later. Now for the first layer, I'll be measuring 1 fluid ounce of part A with 1 fluid ounce of part B. I've never used this type of silicone before, but it sure does have a pretty color. Now I'm going to be using a small popsicle stick to mix everything up. And now you can see I'm just brushing the silicone on top of the sculpture. An important thing to know before you start this is you want to get in every nook and cranny that you find. Life lesson. A good way to fill in these little nooks and crannies is to do what I'm doing here and just pat on them. You just want to pat all those bubbles out. And then after you've done all that, you just wait for it to dry. I waited overnight, but you can just follow the instructions, which was 4 hours for me. Okay, so now we're going to do our first pour, and a key step for this one is making sure that everything is thoroughly mixed. One trick that I like to use is raising the cup up above the sculpture and pour it out high above it. This is so you have less bubbles whenever the silicone is trying to cure. This step is pretty self-explanatory. All you want to do is make sure you have all the tentacles covered. I made the mistake this time of not mixing up enough silicone on the first layer, so now I'm going back and mixing up a little bit more. And that seemed to be the perfect amount. Alright, so a good way to find out if your mold has dried yet is really just to touch it. Just put your finger up to it, and if it pushes back, then you know it's ready. So now what I'm doing is trimming away the excess cardboard just so I can stick down the top barrier a little bit easier. Looks like the barrier that I've made fits it perfectly. Alright, so now we're on to our actual last step of the molding process. This step is pretty similar to the last one, We're just putting more silicone into the barriers. Alright, so the mold is now complete. It's a nice blue color. So by pressing on all these parts right here, they're all very firm, and that means it's time to demold, or not demold, but take away all the barriers and get to the mold. Okay, so now that we have demolded or taken all the barriers off of here, you can see them over there. Can now take this guy out, and yeah. So we have our mold out, or our sculpture out of the mold. Kind of had to rip its tentacles off just to make it easier to get out, but we don't need it anymore since we have a mold of it. Good next step, if you have still a little bit of clay inside of your mold, you can get some alcohol. Rubbing alcohol is fine. Put on a Q-tip and scrape. Just scrape around where you see clay, and it should dry up the clay. And so now we're ready to cast. I'm going to put some cornstarch in this. It'll help with the bubbles in the resin. Alright, so now that I've taught you how to make one of these silicone molds for your sculptures, this one was an octopus. I will now show you the process in the next video on how to turn it into one of these. So I hope you I hope you tune into the next episode, and please share this if you found it enjoyable or helpful, and if you have any suggestions for any other videos that I do, or any other topics, maybe a Q&A at some point, make sure to comment down below, and I'll make sure I get to those. I'll see you in the next video.